Adeline Rook did not cry when Lavinia Doss told her to carry her 9 pies back out to the wagon in front of the whole of Redgate at a supper Redgate had asked her to bake for. She did not cry. She did not argue. She picked the pies up 2 at a time, the way a woman picks up things she has carried before, and she walked them out through 200 people and set them on the seat of a spring wagon in the dark. If you have ever been the person a room decides not to see, stand still with me a minute. This one is for you. Hit subscribe if you want to hear the rest of it. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from, because I would like to know how far this story travels tonight. Now, let's go back to Redgate, New Mexico territory. The spring of 1886. The plaza at Redgate was not much of a plaza. It was a square of packed dirt with a hitch rail on 3 sides and a stone curbed well in the middle of it that everybody in the county had drunk out of and nobody in the county trusted. The Doss Mercantile stood on the north side. The Territory Road came in past it and went out again toward Springer. On the evening of the 3rd of April, 1886, there were 4 tables set end to end down the middle of that square, and lanterns strung on baling wire over the top of them, and 200 people standing around in their good coats, with the wind coming off the mesa cold enough to make the lanterns jump. It was a subscription supper. The town meant to raise $300 to sink a new well. Everybody had a reason to want it. The old well on the plaza was 40 feet deep and 30 years old, and it had been going off since the summer before. It tasted of iron in the morning and of something else in the afternoon. Doc Tull had stood up in the schoolhouse in February and said in front of the whole committee that Redgate ought to quit that well and sink another, and for once in that town's life, nobody argued with him. So they set the tables, and they charged 75 cents a plate, and they asked every woman on the north end of the county to bring something. They asked Adeline Rook for 9 dried apple pies. They did not ask her to cook the supper. They had not asked her to cook anything in Redgate for 3 years. But a pie is a pie, and a pie can be carried in by somebody else's hands, and Mrs. Hollis Doss had a list, and on the list there was a line that said pies. 9, Mrs. Rook, and next to it, in the same hand, the word paid with a line through it. Adeline read that line upside down on the counter in February and did not say anything about it. She baked them on the 3rd, all 9, starting at 4 in the morning. Dried apple, because in April in that country dried apple is what there is. She cut the fat in cold. She made the crust in 3 batches so the kitchen would not warm the lard. She drove the 7 miles in from her place at 7 Mile with the pies in a crate packed in a folded quilt, and she got there while the light was still good, and she carried them to the end table herself. Then she went to the wash bench, because that is where they had put her. There was a plank laid over 2 barrels behind the last table, and 3 dishpans on it, and a boiler of water on a fire. That was the wash bench. Mrs. Doss had written her onto the list twice, pies 9 and washing. You can wash up, Mrs. Rook, Lavinia Doss had said in February, over the counter, with 4 women listening. That will be a help. All right, Adeline said. That was the whole of the conversation. It took less than a quarter of a minute, and Adeline Rook had turned it over in her hands every night since. So she washed. For 2 hours she stood behind the last table, with her sleeves pushed to the elbow and her arms in gray water, and the town of Redgate ate 6 feet in front of her. She heard the whole supper from the back of it. She heard Reverend Chesney say grace. She heard the scrape of 200 plates. She heard men laugh at the far end, and women say the ham was good, and somebody's boiled dressing was better than last year's. And she heard the money going into the tin box on the corner of the head table, coin at a time, and she counted it without meaning to, because counting was a habit with her. At about 8 o'clock, they started carrying out the suite. That is when Mrs. Doss came down the line to the end table where the pies were, and stopped and put her hand flat on the top crust of one of them and turned around. Lavinia Doss was 52 years old. She had a good black wool dress and a jet pin at her throat and a voice that carried the length of a plaza without ever seeming to be raised. She was not a stupid woman, and she was not, in the ordinary way of things, a cruel one. She ran the church committee, the school committee, and the well committee, and she was the reason that supper existed at all. "Whose are these?" she said. Somebody told her. "No, Mrs. Doss said. No, take those back. There was a little noise around the middle tables. Not much. A fork going down." "They are already cut," said Ruby Sayre, who was 24, and had been given the sweet table and did not want any part of this. "Then they can be uncut," Mrs. Doss said. "Nobody here is going to eat anything that woman touched, Ruby, and you know it as well as I do. And I am not going to stand here and pretend otherwise at a supper for a well." And then she said the thing that made it a story instead of a slight. "We are raising money tonight because the water in this town has been making people sick," she said. "It seems to me a poor joke to hand them one of Adeline Rook's pies on top of it." Redgate laughed. "Not all of it. Maybe 30 people out of 200. But 30 people laughing on a plaza in the dark is a sound that fills the whole square, and it fills it for longer than you would think." Adeline Rook was standing at the wash bench with a plate in her hand. She set the plate down in the pan. She dried her hands on the front of her apron, which was already wet, so it did nothing. She walked up the line between the tables to the sweet table, and she did not hurry and she did not look at anyone, and she picked up 2 pies. "Adeline," said Ruby Sayre very quietly, "leave them. I will bring them out after." "They are mine," Adeline said. "I will take them." She carried 2 out to the wagon. She came back and got 2 more. Then 2 more. Then 2. Then the last one. 5 trips. That is the part I want you to sit with, because it is the part the town forgot inside a week and she did not forget in a lifetime. It was not 1 walk. It was 5. Down the length of a lit table, with 200 people on both sides of it, and back up it empty-handed, and down it again. The third time somebody at the near end started to clap, once, and stopped, and it was worse than if he had kept going. Nobody helped her. That is not true. One person did. On the 5th trip, when she came out past the hitch rail with the last pie held in both hands and her hip against the wagon wheel trying to get the tailgate down without setting it in the dirt, a man came out of the dark on the north side of the plaza and put his hand under the pan. "I have it," he said. "I have it," she said. "I know you do." He did not let go. "Both of us have it now. Which side do you want it on?" She looked at him then. He was a lean man, somewhere in his 30s, in a canvas coat gone the color of the road, with a broad hat and 3 days of beard, and a look on him like a man who had ridden a long way and was in no hurry to say why. His gloves were in his belt. He smelled of horse and of cold. "On the seat," she said. "The crate is on the bed." He set the pie on the seat. He put the tailgate up for her and hooked the chain, and he did it the way a man does a thing he has done 10,000 times, without looking at it. "That is 9 pies," he said. "It is. You cut them." "I cut 4 of them," she said. "The others were whole." He stood there a second with his hand on the chain. "You want to sell them?" he said. Adeline Rook looked at him. "They are cut," she said. "I did not ask you what shape they were in. I asked if you would sell them. To who?" "To me," he said. "I have got 34 men laying out at the Pinabiti camp who have been eating salt pork and boiled beans for 9 days, and I would give a good deal for something with sugar in it, and I have got a wagon going that way in the morning." She was quiet for a moment. She was aware of the plaza behind her, and of the lanterns, and of the fact that Mrs. Doss had come as far as the end of the tables and stopped there. 75 cents a pie, Adeline said. "That is cheap. That is what it cost me to bake it. That is not what I asked either." He took out a leather pocketbook and counted money onto the tailgate in the dark, by feel, and pushed it toward her. $9. $1 apiece. "Do not argue with me on a plaza, ma'am. I am tired." She looked at the money. "You do not know who I am," she said. "No." "Then ask somebody. Before you eat that." "I do not have to ask anybody," the man said. "I have been standing under that awning for 40 minutes. And he touched his hat and walked off toward the Doss Corral, and Adeline Rook stood in the dark with $9 in her hand and 9 pies on her wagon, and a plaza full of people 60 feet behind her, and she got up on the seat and clucked to the mare and drove home. She did not cry on the road either. She wanted to. She got about a mile out, past the last of the light, where the road goes down into the arroyo and comes up the other side, and she pulled up in the bottom of it where nobody could see, and she sat there with the line slack for a while and did nothing at all. Then she drove on. Here is what you have to understand about Adeline Rook. And it is the only thing about her body I am going to tell you, and I am telling you because the town of Redgate used it as an excuse for 3 years, and I want it off the table. She was a big woman. She had been a big woman at 12 and at 20, and she was a big woman at 29, and Redgate had decided a long time ago that this was a moral fact about her, instead of a physical one. They said it the way people say things they do not have to defend. That woman has never gone without. That woman eats better than she cooks. It gave them somewhere to put their meanness, and once they had somewhere to put it, they never had to look at her hands. Her hands were the thing. Her hands were the best pair of hands in Colfax County, and there were maybe 6 people alive who knew it. She got home to 7 Mile, a little after 10. Her place sat where the Springer Road bends around a red bank, 7 miles out of Redgate, a 2-room adobe with a plank lean-to on the east end, a dugout kitchen cut back into the bank behind it, a pole corral, a windmill her husband put up in 1881 that ran on 4 days out of 7, and 40 acres of hay ground on the flat that she cut herself with a borrowed mower. She put the mare up. She carried the crate in. She set 9 pies on the kitchen table in a room with 1 lamp burning, and stood and looked at them. Then she took a knife and cut the 5 whole ones into 8 pieces apiece, because she had said $9 for 9 pies, and the man had 34 men to feed, and 4 cut pies and 5 whole ones is not the same thing as 9 pies ready to hand out at a wagon. And if she was going to take $1 apiece, she was going to send them cut. That is who she was. Nobody was ever going to see it. She did it anyway. Then she went to the corner of the dugout kitchen where the coals were banked and lifted the lid off a crock the size of a water bucket, and put 2 fingers in and stirred it and put the lid back. The crock had been her mother's. It had come out of Kansas in the bed of a wagon in 1872, wrapped in a wool shawl with a hot brick alongside it, and it had been fed every 2 days for 14 years, and it had never once been let go cold. Not in 1872, and not in the winter Tom died, and not on any night since. It was sourdough. To a person who had not lived with one, it was a crock of sour paste that smelled like beer and apples. To Adeline Rook, it was the only thing in the territory that had never quit on her. Well, she said to it, that was a bad one. She banked the coals back over it and went to bed. She lay there and listened to the windmill, which was turning, and she did the arithmetic she did every night, which was this. She owed Hollis Doss $300. Tom Rook had signed for it in the spring of 1882, against wire and posts and a mower and 2 years of store account, and Tom Rook had been buried on the 19th of March, 1883, and the note had gone on living after him the way notes do. $300 at 12%. Doss had renewed it 3 times. He did not press her. Exactly. Hollis Doss had never once said a hard word to her in his life. He simply renewed it, in his own hand every 12 months, and each time he renewed it the amount stayed the same, and the year on it changed, and each time she signed it, and each time she walked out of that store past his wife. It was due again the 1st of December, 1886. She had $61 in a lard tin under the floor of the lean-to, and $9 in her apron pocket, and 40 acres of hay that would bring maybe $80 if it rained in July, and nothing at all if it did not. She was 29 years old. She had been a widow for 3 years and 15 days. And she was, in the exact and unarguable judgment of the town of Redgate, New Mexico Territory, the woman who had made 41 people sick at a wedding supper in February of 1883 and had gone right on cooking as if nothing had happened. That is what she was going to sleep on. That is what she had slept on for 3 years. She was still asleep at 5:15 the next morning when a horse came into the yard. She heard him before she was properly awake. One horse, walking, and then stopping, and then a man not getting down. That is a thing men do out in that country. They ride into a yard, and they sit there and let the house know. Adeline got up and put her dress on over her shift and pinned her hair with 3 pins instead of 9, and opened the door with the lamp behind her. It was the man from the plaza. He was sitting a big flea-bitten gray with his hands crossed on the horn, and there was just enough gray in the east to show the shape of him. "It is 5:20, she said. "Yes, ma'am. You are here for the pies." "I am here for the pies," he said. "That is $9 of pie, and it is 22 miles to my camp, and I want it there for dinner." She went in and got her shoes. He got down and put the crate in a pack rig on a lead mule while she held the lamp, and when the last pan was in, he looked at what she had done to them. "You cut them. They were 5 whole and 4 cut," she said. "You cannot hand 5 whole pies out to 34 men at a wagon. Somebody gets a quarter and somebody gets crumbs, and then you have got a fight over pie, which is the stupidest kind of fight there is." He looked at the crate for a while. "Mrs. Rook," he said. "You know my name?" I asked. "Then you know the rest of it." "I know what 4 people told me on a plaza last night, and every one of them told it different," he said. "My name is Cass Barlow. I run the bell cross on the Vermejo." She knew the brand. Everybody knew the brand. It was on 9,000 head of cattle, and it had been burned into the north end of that county since 1871, and the man who owned it was standing in her yard at 5:30 in the morning, with mud on his knees from tying a pack. "Mr. Barlow," she said. "My cook is done," Barlow said. "Cotton Hazlitt. He is 68, and his hands have gone bad on him, and he went to his sister at Trinidad on the 28th of March, and he is not coming back, and I have had a horse wrangler frying meat for 9 days, and the whole outfit is about ready to quit me over it. We pull the wagon out for the spring works on the 12th. That is 8 days. 34 men, 61 days, 4 outfits working together off my wagon on the Ponil and the Vermejo, and every one of those days somebody has got to put 3 meals on the ground and get them there hot." Adeline stood in her own doorway with the lamp in her hand and said nothing at all. $75 the month, Barlow said. "That is too much. That is what it costs. A roundup cook gets $45, she said. $50 if he is good and there is somebody bidding for him. A roundup cook gets $45, and I have hired 6 of them in 11 years, and 4 of them were a mistake," Barlow said. "I am not paying you $75 to fry meat. I am paying $75 so that on the 40th day out, when it is raining and the horses have quit, and Teague is in a temper, and there is not a dry stick in 20 miles, there is still coffee. That is a different job, and it costs different money." She had not been offered a job in Redgate in 3 years. She had been offered washing. She had been offered a wash bench and 75 cents a plate for other people to eat off, and once, in 1884, a woman at Springer had asked her to bake bread for a boarding house and then written 8 days later to say she had changed her mind, and had not said why, because she did not have to. "Mr. Barlow," Adeline said, "do you know what they say about me?" "Some of it." "Say it back to me." He did not look away, and he did not soften it. "They say you cooked the Doss wedding in February of 1883, he said, "and that 41 people took sick off it, and that one of them was your husband, and that you have never once said you were sorry." "That is right," she said. "That is exactly right, and there is not a word of it that is not true, and I would like you to understand that before you put your name to anything with mine on it. 41 people took sick. Some of them were sick 5 weeks. Bess Chaffin was 6 weeks in her bed and has not had a well day since, and there is not a soul in Redgate who does not lay it at my door. And I have never once said I was sorry, because I am not, because I did not do it, and the day I say sorry is the day I say I did." Barlow stood there in the half-dark. "How many did you feed?" he said. She had not expected the question. In 3 years, nobody had asked her a question about that day. They had told her about it. Nobody had asked. 80, she said. And 41 took it. 41. So 39 did not. 39 did not. He nodded once, slowly, as though she had told him the price of something. "I want you on my wagon," he said. "You are hearing me, and you are not listening to me. I am listening to you fine." He pulled his glove back on. "Mrs. Rook, I have been buying and selling in that town since I was 19, and I have watched Redgate be sure about a thing exactly the way it was sure last night. And I want to tell you what I saw last night, and then I am going to get on my horse. I saw a woman carry 9 pies out of a lit square, 2 at a time, 5 trips, past 200 people. Anybody can bake. I have never in my life seen anybody do that. If you can do that on a plaza, you can do it in the rain on the 40th day, and that is the only qualification I care about." The east was pink behind him by then. She could see the gray horse's ears. "There is one thing," she said. "Name it. The water. What about it?" "If I take your wagon," Adeline said, "I take the water with it. Nobody drinks out of a pond while my wagon is feeding him. Not a dirt tank, not a stock pond, not a hole in a creek bed with 300 heads standing in it. Drinking water comes out of running water or out of a spring pipe, in my kegs. And my kegs get scalded and covered, and they get used for nothing else on this earth. And where there is no running water, it gets boiled, all of it, coffee or no coffee. And if that puts your wagon 6 miles off your line on a Tuesday, then your wagon goes 6 miles off your line on a Tuesday." Barlow looked at her. "That will cost me," he said. "Yes, Teague will fight you on it every day for 61 days. Then he will lose every day for 61 days, she said, "or you can go back to your horse wrangler." He got up on the gray. He sat there a minute with the reins in one hand. "Be at the store Tuesday at 10 in the morning, he said. "I will have it written." "Written? You are asking me to move my wagon 6 miles on a Tuesday for water," Barlow said. "That is not a favor, that is a term. Terms get written. Tuesday, at Doss's, at 10. And he rode out of the yard with the mule and 9 pies behind him. Now I have to take you back 3 years, because you cannot understand what happened at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning in front of the Doss Mercantile unless you understand what happened on the 24th of February, 1883. Amity Doss married Ross Crandall on that day. It was the biggest wedding Colfax County had had. Hollis Doss owned the store, and the store carried half the north end of the county on its books, and when a storekeeper like that marries off his own family, everybody comes, and everybody came. 80 guests. They set it at the Doss home place 3 miles east of town, in the long room and out under the cottonwoods, because it had come off warm that week. They hired Adeline Rook to cook it. She was 26 then. She had been cooking for pay since she was 17, and she had fed the section gang at Maxwell and the Bell Cross wagon twice under Cotton Hazlitt, and a 4th of July at Cimarron that ran 300 plates. Hollis Doss paid her $12 and 4 days. She did the ham and the beef and the bread and 22 pies. She did boiled dressing and slaw and 3 kinds of pickle, and a bride's cake with a paper collar on it that took her a day and a half, and she made 6 gallons of lemonade in 2 stone crocks, because Lavinia Doss did not permit spirits at anything, and 80 people in the Sun have to drink something. The ice for the lemonade did not come from Adeline Rook. That is the whole of this story in one sentence, and I am going to say it now, and then I am going to make you wait for it. Because she waited 3 years. The supper was at 4 in the afternoon. It went well. It went so well that Lavinia Doss came out to the cook fire at 7 o'clock and said, in front of 2 women, that Mrs. Rook had done very nicely. And Adeline went home in the dark with $12 and her Crocs and a feeling in her chest she could still call up at will 3 years later, which was that she had done a good piece of work and it had been seen. The first ones went down on the 3rd of March. It was not sudden. That is what fooled everybody, including Doc Tull. It came on slow, a week and more after, in 1s and 2s, a headache, then a fever that climbed and stuck, then the belly, then 3 weeks of it. Ross Crandall's mother, the Sayre family, all 5. Reverend Chesney's wife, Hollis Doss himself, for 19 days. Bess Chaffin, Marion Pike's nephew, who came out of it fine and is roping today. Tom Rook went down on the 6th of March. He was 31 and he had never been sick a day, and Adeline sat up with him for 13 nights, and he was buried on the 19th of March, 1883, in the plot on the rise east of Redgate, where you can see the mesa. By the time they buried him, the county had settled its mind. You have to see how reasonable it was. That is the thing about Redgate, that Adeline could never make anybody outside understand. Nobody in that town was being wicked. 41 people ate a supper, and 41 people took sick, and the supper had been cooked by 1 pair of hands, and everybody in the territory knew that bad meat in warm weather will lay a crowd out, and it had come off warm that week. Doc Toole said as much on the 14th of March, standing in the Doss front room, and he said it carefully, and he said he could not be sure, and by supper time it was going around the county, as Doc Toole says it was the meat. Nobody asked what else 41 people had in common. Nobody asked what the 39 had in common either. Why would they? They had an answer, and it was an answer with a woman's name on it. And the woman was a big woman who had married a man Redgate thought had married beneath himself the other way round, and she had cooked all over that county for 9 years and been paid more than the women who did it for their own church for nothing. There was 6 years of small resentment lying around loose in that town, and in March of 1883 somebody handed it a place to sit down. The word did not come until October. That was the harvest supper at the schoolhouse. Adeline had not been asked to cook. She came because she had lived there 8 years, and she was not going to be run out of a room. She brought a platter of cold beef sliced thin with mustard, and set it on the table, and it sat there for 2 hours. And not one slice of it went. At the end, Lavinia Doss picked the platter up herself and carried it across the room and put it in Adeline Rook's hands and said, in the voice that carries, "Take it home, Mrs. Rook, leftovers to the leftover." There were 60 people in the schoolhouse. It got a laugh. It also got a name, and it was the kind of name that fits in a man's mouth at a corral, and in a woman's mouth at a well, and on a piece of paper in a store, and Redgate used it for 3 years. Not always out loud. It did not have to be out loud. It was in the way the list said pies. 9, Mrs. Rook. It was in the wash bench. That is what was standing on the boardwalk in front of the Doss Mercantile at 10 o'clock on the morning of Tuesday, the 6th of April, 1886, when Cass Barlow came up the plaza with a folded sheet of paper in his coat, and Marcus Teague half a step behind him, arguing. Marcus Teague was 41 years old, and he had been wagon boss of the Bell Cross for 11 years. And he had been arguing with his employer since the Vermejo crossing. "I am not saying she cannot cook," Teague said. "You have said it 3 times. I am saying there is not a wagon in this territory that runs a woman, and there is a reason for that, and the reason is 34 men and 61 days, and no place to put her." "There is a bed wagon and a fly and a tent," Barlow said. "That is not what I mean, and you know it is not." "Then say what you mean, Marcus, out loud, on the boardwalk where she can hear it, because she is standing right there." She was. She had been standing on the boardwalk in front of the Doss Mercantile since 20 minutes before 10, in her good dress, which was the blue one, with her hands folded. Because she had learned a long time ago that if you are early and you stand still, nobody can say you came in late and made a scene. Teague looked at her. To his credit, he did not look away. "Ma'am," he said, "it is nothing personal to you. It is entirely personal to me," Adeline said. "But go on." "I have got 4 outfits working off that wagon," Teague said. "Bell Cross, the Sanborn, the Chaffin Brothers, and the Ute Creek Pool. Some of those men I have never laid eyes on. There is going to be talk, and there is going to be trouble, and I am the man that has to settle it at 11 o'clock at night with a shovel handle." "There is going to be talk," she agreed. "Well then, there is already talk, Mr. Teague. There has been talk about me in this county for 3 years, and it has not killed me yet, and it will not start in April." She let that sit. "Here is what I will say to you, and then I am done. You do not have to like me. You do not have to speak to me except about work. All I want out of you is that when I say the water goes in the white kegs, the water goes in the white kegs, and you back me in front of the men the first time somebody tries it. Once, and after that you will not have to do it again." Teague chewed on that. "The first time," he said. "Once, and if you cannot feed 34 men, then send me home on the 3rd day and dock me," she said. "I will not argue, and I will not come back at you for it." There were maybe 20 people on that plaza who had stopped what they were doing. That is how it is in a town of 300. Hollis Doss had come out onto his own boardwalk with his sleeve garters on and stood there. Ruby Sayre was at the corner of the store with a basket on her arm and had been there for some time. Barlow took the folded sheet out of his coat and put it on the top of the flour barrel that stood by the door and smoothed it flat. "I will read it," he said. And he read it out loud, on the boardwalk, in front of the Doss Mercantile, in a plain voice, with no shine on it at all, and this is what it said. "That Adeline Rook of 7 Mile is engaged by the Bell Cross as cook for the Spring Works, from the 12th of April to the 11th of June, 1886, at $75 the month. That the cook has the wagon, the fire and the ground inside the rope, and no man comes inside it without asking, and that includes the wagon boss and the owner. That the cook has the water. Drinking water is taken from running water or a spring, in her kegs, and where it is not, it is boiled. The wagon will be placed for the water. The boss will make good the miles. That 2 men are detailed to her for wood and water for the whole of the works, and she names them. That she is paid at the wagon on the last day, in front of the outfit, in the same line as the men." "That last one is not usual," Doss said from his boardwalk. "No," Barlow said. "It is not." "May I ask why it is in there?" "Because I put it in there," Adeline said. That is all she said about it, then or ever. The men on that wagon were going to be paid in a line by lamplight on the 11th of June, with the whole outfit standing around, and she meant to stand in that line, and she meant Redgate to hear about it. She had thought that clause up at 2 in the morning, and she had written it on the back of a seed envelope, and she was not going to explain it to Hollis Doss. Barlow signed it against the flour barrel. She signed it under him. Her hand was steady. Doss witnessed it, because he was the nearest man with ink, and because a storekeeper witnesses things. "Name your two," Barlow said. "Ferris Dunlow," she said. "The Dunlow that shoes. Fee, all right. And Otis Kell." Teague looked up. "Kell rides for me. He is my best rope." "Then he can rope in the morning and haul in the afternoon," Adeline said, "because he is the only man I have ever watched load a barrel on a wagon and stop to see whether the head was tight before he tipped it, and I do not want water in my flour on the 40th day." Barlow wrote both names on the paper, and that would have been the end of it, except that the door of the mercantile opened, and Lavinia Doss came out. She had her spectacles in her hand. She looked at the paper on the flour barrel, and she looked at Barlow, and then, for the first time in about 14 months, she looked directly at Adeline Rook. "Mr. Barlow," she said, "I wonder if you know what you have done. I have hired a cook. Mrs. Doss, you have hired a cook," she said, "and in 6 weeks you will have 34 men laid out on the Ponil and no wagon within 30 miles of a doctor. And you will remember this morning, and you will remember that I stood on this boardwalk and said it to you in front of witnesses." The plaza was very quiet. Adeline Rook looked at her hands on the flour barrel and did not lift her head, and I want to be honest with you about what was happening inside her. Because it was not courage. It was the opposite of courage. She was 29 years old, and she was standing in front of the store where she owed $300, and she wanted to go home so badly that her knees had gone loose. "Mrs. Doss," Barlow said. "Yes." "Were you at the wedding?" "I gave the wedding. Did you drink the lemonade?" Lavinia Doss blinked at him. It was such a small question, and it came in from such a strange direction that for a second the whole thing wobbled. "I do not," she said. "I do not take anything sweet in the afternoon." "What on earth has that got to do with it?" "Nothing," Barlow said. "Nothing in the world." "Good morning, ma'am." And he folded the paper and put it in his coat, and that was the 6th of April, 1886. Now she had 6 days. I want to spend a little time here, because this is the part of the story the town never saw, and it is the part that decided everything that came after. Anybody can be brave on a boardwalk for 4 minutes. What Adeline Rook did between the 6th and the 12th of April is the actual reason 34 men came off that range in June the way they did. She started with the wagon. The Bell Cross chuck wagon was a heavy 3-inch running gear with a box built on it and a chuck box on the tail with a hinged lid that dropped down to make a work table on a leg. Cotton Hazlitt had run it for 9 years, and Cotton Hazlitt, God bless him, had let it go. She spent the whole of Wednesday inside it, with a bucket and a brush and a bar of lye soap and a scraper, and she took every drawer out and washed it and set it in the sun, and she found, in the bottom of the flour bin, 1.5 inches of caked flour that had been there since some other spring, and she took it out with a putty knife and burned it. Then she rebuilt it. Everything in that chuck box got a place, and the place got learned in the dark. Coffee on the left. Always. Because a man reaching for coffee at 4 in the morning reaches with his left hand while his right is on the pot. Salt, soda, sugar, the pepper tin, the sourdough keg in the bottom right where it would stay warm off the firebox. Tin plates, 40 of them, and 40 cups, counted and counted again. The wreck pan hooked on the near side. The dish rags boiled and folded. Then the water. She bought 4 oak kegs from the cooper at Springer at $2.75 apiece, and had Fee Dunlow haul them out on the Friday. And she scalded every one of them twice with boiling water and a chain, and she painted 2 of them white with a can of lead and oil off Doss's shelf, and she painted a number on each, 1 and 2 on the white ones, 3 and 4 on the bare ones. The white ones were drinking and cooking, the bare ones were wash and stock and nothing else, forever, no matter how thirsty a man got. She made Fee say it back to her. 1 and 2 is drinking, Fee said. 3 and 4 is wash, and if number 3 is full and number 1 is empty, and there is a man standing there with his tongue hanging out, then he waits. Then he waits, she said. Say it again on Tuesday. She bought her stores at the Doss Mercantile on the Bell Cross account on the Saturday, and it took 2 hours. And Hollis Doss filled the order himself and did not once meet her eye. 200 pounds of flour, 100 of pinto beans, 60 of sugar, 40 of green coffee, because she roasted her own and she was not going to argue about it. Salt, 3 sacks, coarse baking soda, dried apples in a 50-pound box, dried peaches, 20, molasses 2 gallons, lard vinegar a 12-gallon coffee pot and a spare 6 Dutch ovens with the deep lids and 2 with cracked ones traded back, a new coffee mill because the old one had a tooth gone. Rice, cornmeal, prunes, 4 tins of pepper, and a case of tomatoes in cans, which was Cotton Hazlitt's one good habit, and which she kept, because a man who has eaten beef 3 times a day for 11 days will drink the juice out of a tomato can standing up and be better for it. And 30 pounds of saltpeter and 200 of coarse salt in a separate sack, marked for the barrels. Because here is the other half of her trade, and it is the half Redgate had never once thought about. You cannot feed 34 men on a range for 61 days out of a wagon with fresh meat. Somebody kills a beef about every 4th day, and in April on the Penill, a beef that is hung at night and eaten by the day after tomorrow is fine, and everything after that is a gamble a good cook does not take. So the rest of it goes into barrels, corned, salted down in brine in oak, headed up, and eaten in June out of the same barrel it went into in April. And brine is a thing you get right or you do not get right, and there is no middle. She made hers the way her mother made it in Kansas, which was by weight and then by test. So much coarse salt, so much water, boiled and skimmed and cooled all the way down before a piece of beef ever went in it, because warm brine on warm meat is how you lose a barrel. And then the potato. That was the test. A peeled potato, dropped in. If it floated with a circle of it showing the size of $1, the brine would hold. If it sank, the brine was weak and the barrel would go over inside 3 weeks, and you would find it out on the day you needed it most. She showed Fee Dunlow the potato on the Saturday evening in her own yard, in a wash boiler, with the light going. That is all there is to it, Fee said. That is all there is to it. Seems like a small thing to hang a summer on. Everything that matters is a small thing you can do wrong, Adeline said. Put your finger in and taste it. He did, and made a face. Remember that, she said. That is the taste. When I am not standing over you and you are the one making it, that is the taste. On the Sunday she did not go to church because she had not gone to church in Redgate since 1884, and she baked instead. On the Monday she killed and dressed 2 of her own hens, wrapped a ham she had been keeping since November, packed her own knives in a roll of ticking, and went down into the dugout kitchen and knelt on the cold floor by the crock. She had thought about this for 4 nights. A sourdough start is a living thing and it does not travel well. Heat is what it wants, and heat is the one thing a wagon on the Ponill in April does not reliably have. Cotton Hazlitt had run his in a keg wrapped in a blanket and had let it go cold twice in 9 years and had to beg a start off the Sanborn wagon both times. Adeline Rook was not going to beg a start off anybody. She split hers. She took the crock that had come out of Kansas in 1872 in the bed of a wagon with a hot brick beside it, and she fed it heavy on the Sunday, and on the Monday she divided it into 3. One stayed home in the dugout in the cool dark where it would sleep. One went into a 5-gallon keg for the wagon, and one went into a stone jar the size of a coffee tin with a cork and a piece of oiled cloth over the cork, and that one was going to ride in a nail keg packed in wool inside the chuck box, and if the wagon keg ever went cold, she had a second life in her hand. "You are talking to it," Fee said from the doorway. "I have talked to it for 14 years. What do you say to it?" Adeline put the lid on the jar. "I tell it what we are doing tomorrow," she said. They pulled out of the Bellcross home place at 4 in the morning on the 12th of April, 1886, chuck wagon in front with a 4-mule team, bed wagon behind, the remuda of 190 saddle horses strung out on the left, and 34 men in the gray dark, not saying much of anything. Adeline Rook drove her own wagon. She had asked to, and Teague had said no, and Barlow had said yes. And at 6 in the evening, on a bench above the Ponal where the grass came up green, she set the wagon tongue north to the pole star, the way Cotton Hazlitt never had. So the outfit would know which way was north at 3 in the morning without thinking about it, and she got a fire going in a hole she dug herself. And at 20 minutes past 6, she rang a bell that had come off her own back door at 7 Mile. 34 men came in and ate. Nobody said anything about the food. Not one man. They ate it, and they scraped their plates into the wreck pan, and they went and sat down against their saddles, and Adeline Rook stood at her wagon and thought, "Well, that is that." And then old Marion Pike, who was 61 and had ridden for 6 outfits in that country and was known to be a sour man, came back to the wagon with his cup and held it out. "Ma'am," he said, "I have been eating out of wagons since 1868. Yes, sir, that is the first bread I have had on a roundup that did not want an apology with it." And he took his coffee and walked off. Here is what a day looked like, and I am going to give it to you in full once, because everything that happens after this happened inside this shape, 61 times. She was up at 3. Not for 3, she built the fire first, in a hole banked on the windward side with the shovel, and she set the big pot on before she had her own hair pinned. Because the first thing 34 men smell in the dark is coffee, and the smell of it is worth 20 minutes of goodwill. She ground it herself, fresh, every morning, a mill between her knees on the wagon seat. Then, the bread. The dough had been set the night before out of the keg, and it had risen under a lid in the chuck box in the dark, and at 3:30 she had it out on the drop lid and was cutting it. 8 dozen biscuits at breakfast. She had 6 Dutch ovens, and she ran them in 2 batches with shovelfuls of coals on the lids, and she turned each oven a third of a turn twice, while it baked so nothing on the fireside burned, and she did all of this in the dark, with a lantern hung on the fly-pole, and her hands knowing where everything was, because she had built the box herself in April. Meat at 4, beans, which had been in a pot at the edge of the coals all night. Gravy, stewed apples on the days she had them. She rang the bell at 4 in the morning, and 34 men came out of their bedrolls, and the horse wrangler brought the remuda in, and by 5 they were roping out horses in the gray, and by 5:30 the country was empty, and there was nobody in that camp but her. Then she washed 40 plates and 40 cups in water out of keg 3, boiled. Then she broke camp. The fly down, the bedrolls loaded on the bedwagon, the fire drowned, everything on the wagon and lashed, the team hooked, and she drove 8 or 10 miles to wherever Teague had said, alone with a bedwagon behind her and the world all around, and she got there by 10 and started dinner. Dinner at noon for whoever came in. Then the barrels, and the beef, and the bread setting, and the mending of the fire hole, and the wood, and the water, and supper at 6, and dishes, and dough, and by 9 at night she was in a tent under the bed wagon, with her shoes off and her feet swollen, and her hands cracked at the knuckles from lye and flour, and at 3 in the morning she got up and did it again. That is the job. That is the whole job. 34 men, 3 meals, 61 days, and not 1 day off, and not 1 hour when somebody was not going to come riding and wanting coffee. I tell you all this because Redgate, New Mexico Territory thought Adeline Rook was lazy. The first trouble came on the 3rd day. It came from a Ute Creek poolman named Alvin Yancey, who was about 30, and quick, and liked an audience, and who had said 3 things to the wagon already that Adeline had let go by. They had camped that night on a bench above a dirt tank at the head of Sow's Creek, because that is where the cattle were, and there was no running water inside 5 miles. So she had sent Kellen Fee at noon with the white kegs 5 miles up to a spring seep in the rocks under the rim, and it had taken them 3 hours. And they had come back with 60 gallons. Yancey came in at dusk, hot, and went straight for keg 3. That is wash water, Adeline said. It is water. It is out of the tank, and it is for the dishes and the stock. Number 1 is on the far side of the wagon. Number 1, Yancey said, is 5 miles of a man's afternoon that could have been spent working cattle, over water that comes out of the same country as that water, and he tipped the dipper and drank it in front of her, and wiped his mouth, and looked around to see who had watched. A few had. About 8. Adeline Rook did not raise her voice. She has never in this story raised her voice, and she is not going to. All right, she said. That is all? That is all from me. She turned around and went back to the fire, and she said, over her shoulder, Mr. Teague. Teague was 30 feet off, with a cup in his hand, and he had seen the whole of it, and I want you to understand that Marcus Teague did not like her, did not want her there, and had told his employer so in front of a store. And he had shaken hands on one thing. Yancey, Teague said. Boss, it is a drink of water. Yancey, when you signed on with this pool you signed to work under my wagon, and my wagon has got a cook, and the cook has got the water. It is in writing, and I read it. You will drink out of number 1 like the rest of us, or you will draw your time in the morning, and I do not care which, and I will not say it twice. There was a long, ugly quiet. That is a hell of a thing, Yancey said. It is. And Yancey put the dipper back in keg 3 and walked off, and that should have been the end of it. And it was not, because Alvin Yancey had one more card, and he played it 4 nights later at the fire on the Ponal in front of 22 men. He waited until she had gone to the wagon for the pies. It was a Sunday. That was the other thing she had started. On Sunday there was pie, dried apple or dried peach, 6 pies in the ovens, cut in 8, and by the 3rd Sunday men from the Sanborn wagon were riding 4 miles over to be there at 6 o'clock and pretending they had business. You all know who she is, Yancey said. That is all I am saying. Nobody answered him. That is the thing about a roundup fire. Nobody answers anybody. Doss wedding, Yancey said. February of 1883. 80 people sat down and 41 of them went to bed for a month, and one of them did not get up, and it was her that cooked it, and everybody in this county knows it, and half of you are sitting here eating out of her pan. Adeline came back around the corner of the wagon with 2 pies in her hands. She had heard the last of it. Of course she had heard it. You can hear a man at a fire from the far side of a chuck wagon on a still night in that country from 100 feet. She set the pies down on the drop lid. Mr. Yancey, she said. Ma'am, you want to have this out? I am not looking for trouble with a woman. No, she said, you are looking for trouble with 22 men about a woman, which is easier. Have it out. I will stand here and you can say the whole of it and nobody will interrupt you, and then I am going to say a thing back, and then we will cut the pie, because it is going cold." Yancey looked around and found that being given the floor is not the same as taking it. "It is only what is said," he muttered. "Then let me say what is said, since you have gone shy." She wiped her hands on her apron. Her voice was as flat as a plate. 80 people ate at the Doss place on the 24th of February, 1883. I cooked it, and I was paid $12. Beginning on the 3rd of March, 41 of them took a fever that lasted 3 to 5 weeks. My husband was one of the 41. He was 31 years old, and he was buried on the 19th of March, and I dug the potatoes out of my own root cellar to pay the man who dug the grave. That is what happened. Is there any part of that you want to correct? Nobody said anything. "Now here is the part nobody in Redgate has ever said out loud," Adeline said, "and I want the whole of this wagon to hear it, because in 6 weeks you are going to be back in that town buying tobacco and it will come up." 80 people ate. 41 took it. That leaves 39 who ate the same beef off the same platter with the same hand serving it, and never had a sick hour. 39, not 2, not 6. 39, she let that stand there. If it was in the meat, she said, "You tell me how the meat picked." And she cut the pie. Now I want to be careful here, because this is where a lesser story lets her win. She did not win. She did not convert anybody at that fire on that night. What she did was say a number out loud, and a number, once it is in the air, sits in men's heads and works on them in their own time. Marion Pike thought about it for 9 days. Then he came to the wagon at noon on the 22nd of April, when there was nobody around, and put his cup down and said, "Mrs. Rook, that 39. Yes, I was at that wedding. I know you were, Mr. Pike. You had 2 helpings of the beef, and you would not take a bite of the boiled dressing, because you said it looked like a poultice." Marion Pike stared at her. "You remember that?" "I remember what everybody ate," she said. "That is not a talent, it is only my work. I have cooked for that county for 9 years. I know that Reverend Chesney will not eat an onion. I know Hollis Doss takes 4 spoons of sugar in a cup of coffee and is ashamed of it. I know Mrs. Sayre's mother cannot have pepper. If I could not carry that in my head, I would have poisoned somebody by accident years ago." Pike was quiet a moment. "I never took sick," he said. "No, sir, you did not. Why did I not?" "I do not know yet," Adeline said. "But I am going to." And she went back to her beans, and Marion Pike stood there with his hat in his hand for longer than a man usually stands anywhere. The works ground on. They worked the Ponil first, then swung east across the Vermejo and up into the Cedar Breaks, then back down onto the flats. Some days they branded 400 calves, and the men came in at dusk with their arms shaking. Some days it rained. On the 28th of April, it rained 14 hours, and she cooked the whole day under a fly that filled with water and had to be pushed up from underneath with a shovel handle every 20 minutes. And she got 3 meals out of a wet fire hole, with wood she had made Kell cut and stack under the wagon 2 days before, because she had seen the weather building on the Sunday. That is a small thing. That is the whole difference between a cook and a good one. She had 200 pounds of dry wood under that wagon on a day the entire country was soaked, because 48 hours earlier she had looked at a sky and made 2 men do something they thought was foolish. On the 30th they killed a beef, and she put up 2 barrels the same afternoon. And she made Fee Dunlow do the brine, and she stood behind him with her arms folded while he tested it. The potatoes sank. "More salt," she said. He added and stirred and dropped it again, and it came up and sat there with a circle of it, showing the size of $1. "There," she said. "That barrel will still be sweet on the 11th of June. How do you know?" Because my mother made it in Kansas in 1872, and my grandmother made it in Missouri before that, and neither one of them ever lost a barrel, and if I lose one, I will hear about it in my sleep. The norther came in on the 6th of May. It came at 4 in the afternoon, out of a clear sky. That is how they come. The light goes brass. The wind swings. Then it drops 40 degrees in 3 hours, and it sleets sideways, and everything you own is wet. They got the fly down before it took it. They lost a coffee pot lid and never found it. By dark it was 24 degrees and blowing. The men came in at 7 and ate standing up with their backs to it. She gave them beef and beans and a full pot and 8 dozen biscuits, and there was not one word said. Then they went and got in their beds and pulled the tarps over their heads, and that was the night. She banked the fire. She washed 40 plates in water so cold it hurt. Then she went to set the dough. The keg was under the chuck box in Otis Kell's canvas sling, which was a kind thing he had built her in the dark and had saved her start a dozen jolts. It was also 14 inches off the ground in a wind, and no man alive would have thought about that, and she had not thought about it either. She got the lid off and put 2 fingers in. It was cold, not cool. Cold, she held the lantern down over it. There was no lift in it at all. No bubble, no dome, no smell but a flat sour nothing. It had not gone bad. It had gone still. Adeline Rook sat down on the wagon tongue in the sleet at 9:30 at night. Here is what that meant, and you have to know a little about bread to feel it. A start is not a recipe. You cannot buy one at Doss's. You get it off somebody, and they got it off somebody, and it goes back. Hers went back to Kansas in 1872, and to Missouri before that. Cold does not kill it outright. Cold makes it lie down. And a start that has lain down takes 3 days and 4 feedings to come back up, and she had 34 men wanting biscuits at 4 in the morning, in 6 hours and 30 minutes. Cotton Hazlitt had gone cold twice in 9 years, and both times he had ridden to the Sanborn wagon and asked. She was not going to ask. She went to the chuck box. She opened the far drawer, the one nobody but her ever opened. She took out a nail keg. Inside it, packed around with raw wool, was a stone jar the size of a coffee tin with a cork in it and a piece of oiled cloth over the cork. She had put that jar in there on the 11th of April at her own kitchen table at 7 Mile, kneeling on a cold floor, thinking about exactly this. She got the cork out. It was warm, not hot. Warm the way the inside of a nail keg packed in wool inside a wooden box is warm, which is 20 degrees warmer than the world was that night. And when she put her finger in, it climbed. "All right," she said. She fed it. She used flour off the top of the bin, which was dry, and water out of keg 1, which she had to break the skim on. Then she put the jar inside her coat, against her, and buttoned the coat over it, and she went and sat as close to the banked fire as a person can sit without burning, and she stayed there. She sat there 4 hours. She did not sleep. Along about 1 in the morning, Fee Dunlow put his head out from under the bed wagon and saw a woman sitting bolt upright in the sleet by a cold fire with her arms folded over her chest, and thought she was praying, and went back to sleep and told that story for 40 years and never got it right. At 2 she opened her coat and looked. It had a dome on it. It smelled like apples and beer. She built the fire back up out of the cedar Kell had stacked under the wagon on the 4th. She made the dough at 2:30 with a start that was 4 hours old and 14 years old at the same time. She set it in a boiler with a lid, wrapped in her own blanket, on the warm ground where the fire hole had been. She rang the bell at 4. 34 men came out of wet beds into 22 degrees and got hot coffee and 8 dozen biscuits, and every one of those biscuits came up. Nobody knew. That is the point I want to leave you with. Not one man on that wagon ever found out that the bell cross came 3 feet from having no bread for 3 days, because the woman who ran it had thought about a cold night on the 11th of April and had split her start in 3. Teague found out in October. Kell told him. He came to the wagon and stood at the rope and said, "Cook, the 6th of May. What about it? Kell says your keg went cold and you never said. It did. And you sat up with it in your coat." "I did." Marcus Teague looked at the ground for a while. "I told Barlow in April there was not a wagon in this territory that runs a woman," he said. "I was there, Mr. Teague. I know you were." He put his hat back on. "I have been 22 years at this. I have had 4 cooks go cold on me. Every one of them come and told me at 4 in the morning that there would not be no bread, like it was weather." He turned to go. "You did not come and tell me anything. There was nothing to tell you." "There was bread." "That," said Teague, "is what I am saying to you," and he walked off, and that is the closest thing to a compliment that man produced in 22 years. Fee Dunlow asked her about the jar 2 days later. "Where did that come from?" "The chuck box." "The far drawer?" "No, ma'am." "Where did it come from?" Adeline Rook wiped her hands. "Kansas," she said. 1872. My mother carried it in a wagon bed wrapped in a shawl with a hot brick beside it, and she was 3 months on the road, and it never went cold on her once. She was 22 and she had 2 dresses and a crock. She put the lid back on the keg. "Fee, I have lost a husband and a name, and near enough everything I had in this world. I have not lost that. I would sit in sleet for 4 hours a night for the rest of my life before I would go to another wagon and ask for a start." By the 2nd week in May, something had changed on that wagon, and nobody had announced it. Teague had quit calling her Mrs. Rook and started calling her cook, which in that country and in that trade is not a demotion, but a rank. Men were washing their own plates without being told. Somebody had built her a proper wood rack out of cedar without asking, and nobody would admit who. Kell had rigged a canvas sling under the chuck box for the sourdough keg so it would not take the jolt on rough ground, and had done it at night, and had said nothing about it. And Cass Barlow had come to the wagon 11 times in 4 weeks, which was more than the owner of the Bell Cross had come to his own wagon in the whole of the spring works of 1885. He never came inside the rope. That was the thing she noticed, and kept noticing. It was in the paper he had written on the 6th of April, and she had put it in there thinking about drunk men, and men in a hurry. And Cass Barlow, who owned the wagon, the mules, the beef, the ground and the paper itself, stopped every single time at the edge of it and waited. "Coffee, Mrs. Rook? There is a pot on. Come in. I will wait until I am asked. You have just been asked." "Then I will come in," he said. And he came in, and he sat on his heels by her fire, and drank her coffee, and looked at the country. And about 1 time in 3 he did not say anything at all for 10 minutes, and she found, to her considerable annoyance, that she did not mind it. He asked her once what she would do with the $150. $300 of it goes on a note, she said, which is the sort of arithmetic that keeps a woman humble. To DOS. To DOS. What is the rate? 12. Barlow turned his cup around in his hands. "I could take that note up," he said. Adeline Rook stopped what she was doing, and turned and looked at him for a good 3 seconds. "Mr. Barlow," she said, "if you ever say that to me again, I will finish this works, and I will not come back in the fall. And I want you to think about whether you meant that kindly enough to lose a cook over." "I meant it kindly. I know you did. That is what is wrong with it." She went back to the pot. There is not one soul in Colfax County who would say Cass Barlow bought that woman's note out of Christian feeling. There is not one. They would say the other thing by Thursday, and they would say it for 20 years, and my part in it would be that I let them. I have got exactly one thing left, and it is that everything I own I got with these." And she held up her hands, floured to the wrist. "And you are not taking that off me to save me $36 in interest." He was quiet. "All right," he said, "all right. May I say one thing back?" "You may. I have got 9,000 head of cattle and 4 sections of deeded ground and a bank in Trinidad that thinks well of me," Cass Barlow said. "And I have never in my life earned anything the way you are earning that $150, and I would trade with you. And I know how that sounds, and I am going to go check the horses." And he went and checked the horses. The Sanborn wagon went down in the second week of May. They were working the same general roundup, 4 miles east of the Bell Cross, camped at the head of Con Bonito, with 19 men and a cook named Purdy Six, who had been on a wagon since he was 15, and was, by every account in that country, a fair hand at it. Their first man went off his horse on the 9th. He was up 4 days later and thought nothing of it. The second went down on the 11th. And the third and fourth on the 13th, and by the 18th of May the Sanborn outfit had 6 men out of 19 laid up in the bed wagon shade, with a fever that climbed and stuck and would not break, and Ab Sanborn had sent a rider 40 miles to Springer for Doc Tull. The Bell Cross wagon had 34 men, and not one of them had missed a meal. Nobody said it for 3 days. Then everybody said it at once. It came out first at the branding pen on the 16th, when a chaff in hand asked Teague straight out what his wagon was doing different, and Teague, who is not a subtle man, said, "We haul our water 5 miles, and we boil what we do not haul, and my cook will horsewhip a man who dips out of the wrong keg," and went back to work. Doc Tull came out on the 20th. He was 46 years old, and he had been the only doctor between Springer and the Colorado line for 11 years, and he was tired in a way that had gotten into his face and stayed. He looked at the Sanborn men. Then he rode 4 miles over to the Bell Cross wagon because somebody had told him to, and he sat on his horse at the edge of Adeline Rook's rope and looked at her camp for a while without getting down. "Mrs. Rook. Doctor. May I come in?" "You may." He got down. He walked the whole camp. He looked at the fire hole, and the wood rack and the fly, and the 40 plates upside down on a clean board with a cloth over them, and the wreck pan, and the 4 kegs standing in a row in the shade of the wagon with the numbers painted on them. "Why are 2 of them white?" "Because a man at 4 in the morning in the dark can tell white from not white," she said, "and cannot read a number." Doc Tull stood there and looked at those kegs for what felt to her like a very long time. "Where does 1 and 2 come from?" "Running water. The Vermejo, above where the cattle get in, or a seep in the rocks under the rim, or nothing. If there is neither one, it gets boiled 10 minutes and cooled in the kegs, and nobody drinks anything else. And 3 and 4? Wash and stock. Out of whatever is there. That is the tank water. It never goes in a mouth." "How long has that been so?" "Since the 12th of April, sir, in writing." Doc Tull got out a handkerchief and wiped his face with it. "Ab Sanborn's camp," he said, "is drawing out of the dirt tank at Corral Springs, which has got 300 head standing in it." "I know it does. You know it does." "Doctor," Adeline said, "I have known it since the 9th, and I have not said one word about it to anybody, and I would be obliged if you would think for about 4 seconds about why." He thought about it, and it went across his face, and it was not a comfortable thing to watch. "Because if you say it," he said, "it is the woman who made 41 people sick, telling a man how to keep his outfit well." "Yes. That is a hell of a position. It is the position I have got." Doc Tull got back on his horse. He sat there. "I will tell him," he said. "I will tell him it came from me." "Thank you." "Mrs. Rook, he had the reins in his hand and he did not move. In March of 1883, I stood in Hollis Doss's front room, and I said I could not be sure, and I said the word meat. And by supper time it was all over this county that I had said it was the meat. I have thought about that a good deal since. I want you to know that I have thought about it. That is not the same as saying it, Adeline said. No, he said, it is not. And he rode away, and she stood there with her arms folded, and she was, for the first time in 3 years, angry in a way that had nothing to do with grief. The 17th of May was a Monday, and it is the day this whole story turns on, and it did not look like anything at all while it was happening. She and Otis Kell had gone for water. That was the ordinary shape of a Monday. The wagon was camped on the flat below the sow's rim, where there was grass and no water fit to drink, and it was 5 miles up to the seep. And she went with him about 1 trip in 3, because the seep ran slow, and it wanted somebody to hold the funnel and somebody to keep the leaves out, and it went twice as fast with 2. Otis Kell was 38 years old. He was a wide, slow-talking man with a broken nose and hands like a set of pliers, and he had roped for the Bell Cross for 5 years. And before that he had worked 4 years for Hollis Doss out at the Doss home place, doing everything a place like that needs doing. They filled keg 1 and were starting on keg 2, and he was talking, because Otis Kell talked when he worked. My back is going to be sorry about this tomorrow, he said. Your back is 38. My back is 60. I'd done for it in 1883, cutting that ice. Adeline Rook was holding a tin funnel in the mouth of an oak keg, and she did not move at all. Cutting what ice? She said. For the wedding. Amity Doss's wedding. He had me and Enos Tate down there 3 days with a saw, and that ice come out heavy, and I was 35 years old, and I carried the most of it up that bank myself like a fool. Down where? Adeline said. The pond. Which pond, Mr. Kell? He looked up at her then, because of how she had said it. The stock pond, he said, below the corral at the home place, the one the corral drains into. The seep ran into the keg. It made a small noise. Away off on the flat somebody was moving cattle, and you could hear it the way you hear things 3 miles off in that country, thin and clear. Tell me all of it, Adeline said, slow, and do not leave a thing out because you think it is small. So he told her. The winter of 1882 into 1883 had been a mild one. That is the first thing, and it is the thing nobody remembered by March. The Vermejo had not made ice worth cutting. Hollis Doss had gone down to the river on the 9th of February with a chisel and found 3 inches, and 3 inches will not do for a wedding on the 24th. Because you want it 8 inches thick, or better, or it is water in a straw pile inside a week. The stock pond below the corral had 8 inches on it. So on the 12th of February, 1883, Hollis Doss sent Otis Kell and a hired man named Enos Tate down to the stock pond with an ice saw and a team, and they cut 14 blocks out of it. And they hauled those blocks up the bank on a stone boat and packed them in the ice house in straw, and it took the 3 of them the best part of 3 days, and Doss paid them each an extra $1.50 for it. The corral at the Doss home place stood on the slope above that pond. So did the privy lot. So did the pig pen. Everything on that slope, for 9 years, had gone downhill into the same 40-yard bowl of water, and in a mild winter it had frozen 8 inches thick, and 14 blocks of it had come up the bank on a stone boat. On the 24th of February, they took the ice out of the straw and broke it up with a mallet in a wash tub, and it went into 3 places. It went into 2 stone crocks of lemonade, 6 gallons, because Lavinia Doss did not permit anything stronger, and 80 people in the sun on a warm February afternoon have to drink something. It went into the tub under the butter, and it went into the pan the cream stood in for the bride's cake. I never thought about it, Kell said. Not one time in 3 years. Ma'am, I swear to you before God, I have hauled ice off that pond 4 winters and put it in the ice house and never thought a thing about it, and nobody ever asked me anything, because why would they ask me? I am the man that carries things. Mr. Kell, ma'am, look at me. He looked at her. Nobody is going to lay a hand on you over this, Adeline Rook said. Not from me. Do you hear that? Not from me. Not now. Not ever. You cut ice because a man told you to cut ice, and there is not a person on this earth in 1883 who knew what was in that pond, and there is hardly a person on this earth in 1886 who knows it either. You did not do a thing wrong. Then why do I feel like I am about to be sick? Otis Kell said. Because you are just now finding out that a thing you did with your hands went somewhere, she said. Everybody feels that. It passes, and then it comes back. They finished the kegs. They loaded them. They drove the 5 miles down off the rim without speaking, and about halfway down Otis Kell said, "Mrs. Rook, your husband," and stopped, and could not get any further, and she said, "I know." And that was all either of them ever said about it. She got the fire going. She fed 34 men. She washed 40 plates. And then she sat on the tailgate of the bedwagon with a stub of pencil and a flour sack cut open flat, and she started to write down names. It took her 2 nights. 80 people had sat down at the Doss home place on the 24th of February, 1883. And Adeline Rook had cooked for every one of them, and served most of them herself, and she found when she made herself do it, that she could get to 74 of them by name, and place the other 6 by family. That is not a miracle. That is 4 days of work, and a woman who had run 300 plates at Cimarron, and never once given a man pepper who could not have it. She wrote the 41 in 1 column. She had that list already. Everybody in the county had that list. It had been said out loud in the schoolhouse in March of 1883. Then she wrote the 39, and beside each of the 39 she wrote what she could remember about what was in that person's hand. The 4 men who never came up from the horses at all. Enos Tate carried them a jug of coffee at 5 o'clock, and they stood at the corral and drank it and went home. Marion Pike would not take anything sweet in his life, and had 2 helpings of beef, and would not touch the boiled dressing, because it looked like a poultice. Reverend Chesney, who took coffee because he always took coffee, and made a small joke about it, and whose wife took lemonade, and was in bed for 4 weeks. Lavinia Doss, who does not take anything sweet in the afternoon, who had said so herself on a boardwalk in front of witnesses on the 6th of April, 1886, in answer to a question that made no sense to her at all. The 3 Sanborn women, who came 2 hours late off a broken axle and got beef and cold biscuits standing up in the kitchen at 6 and never sat down. Old Mrs. Ordway, who was 81 and drank nothing but her own tea out of her own flask because she had not trusted another woman's water since Missouri. And Cassius Barlow, aged 31 in that February, who had been on night guard with 700 head at the Ute Creek pool, and had ridden in at 3 in the afternoon in the clothes he had slept in, and had stood at the back by the door, and eaten a plate of beef with his hat on, and drunk 2 cups of coffee out of the pot on the stove, because a man who has been awake since 1 in the morning does not want lemonade. 39 names, and for 31 of them she could say, out loud, with the plate in her memory, that they had not touched that lemonade. And in the other column, 41 names, and not one of them was a person she could remember refusing a glass. Tom Rook had drunk 2. He had carried chairs out of the barn all morning, and it had come off warm, and he stood by the crock in his shirt sleeves, and drank 2 glasses one after the other, and made a face, and said it wanted more sugar. Adeline Rook sat on the tailgate of a bedwagon on the Vermejo at 1 in the morning on the 19th of May, 1886, with a flour sack over her knees and a lantern turned down low. And she found out what had happened to her husband, and it was ice, and it had been in the ice house since the 12th of February, and she had served it to him herself with her own hand. She did not make a sound. Fee Dunlow was 30 feet away asleep under the wagon and never woke up. That is the midpoint of this story, and I want to be plain about what it did and did not do. It did not clear her. Not one bit of it. Because look at what she actually had. She had a list of names written on a flour sack in her own hand, from her own memory, 3 years after the fact. She had one man's word about where 14 blocks of ice were cut, and that man was a hired hand who had worked for Doss and now worked for Barlow and could be waved away in 6 words by anybody who wanted to wave him away. She had a stock pond that anybody could look at and see nothing wrong with, because you cannot see it. That is the entire nature of the thing. And she had arithmetic. Redgate was not going to take arithmetic from Adeline Rook. That is the hard center of this, and she knew it before the lantern was out. If she rode into that plaza and said, "It was not my beef, it was your ice, and the pond takes the drain off your own corral, and here are 41 names and 39 names on the back of a flour sack," the town of Redgate would hear one thing: the leftover woman has thought up an excuse at last, and it has taken her 3 years, and it blames Hollis Doss. She told Barlow the next night. He came to the wagon at about 8, with the light going long and gold across the flat, and he stopped at the rope, and she said, "Come in and sit down, and do not say anything for a minute." And he came in and sat down on his heels by the fire. She told him the whole of it. The ice, the 12th of February, the 14 blocks, the pond and the corral and the privy lot, and the pig pen on the slope above it, the lemonade, the butter, the cream, the 41 and the 39. She read him the flour sack by firelight, and she read it flat, name after name, the way you read a tally. Cass Barlow did not interrupt her once. When she got to the 39 and came to his own name, she read it the same as the others, and he put his cup down on the ground very carefully, as though it were full and he was afraid of it. "I had come off night guard," he said. "You had. I stood at the back by the stove. You did. I drank coffee because it was there, and it was 3 in the afternoon, and I had been up since 1. He was looking at his own hands. "Mrs. Rook, I have been in that county 3 years since, and I have heard your name in every store and every corral and at 4 brandings, and every time somebody said the Rook woman made 41 people sick, I have thought, well, I ate that supper, and it never hurt me. Every time. I have thought that particular thought maybe 100 times. I know. And I never once went the next step." "No," she said. "Nobody did. That is the whole of it. There is no villain in this, Mr. Barlow, and I have wanted one for 3 years so bad I could taste it. Hollis Doss cut ice off his own pond because the river was thin and his family was getting married, and it was the 12th of February, and he wanted it 8 inches. If you had 8 inches on your pond and 3 on the river, you would have done exactly the same thing." Doc Tull said meat, because in a warm February meat is what it is 9 times out of 10. And the county did the arithmetic anybody would do, which is 88 and 41 fell, and 1 woman cooked. All of them were being reasonable. "That is worse," Barlow said. "Yes," said Adeline Rook, "it is much worse." They sat there. The fire went down, and neither of them built it up. "Then we go to town," he said. "With what?" "With Kell. With the sack. With me." "And what does Redgate hear?" She shook her head slowly. "It hears the Bell Cross took up for its cook. It hears a hired man was got at. It hears a woman put together a story on a flour sack, and it hears that she has waited until Hollis Doss cannot answer it. Because it is 3 years gone, and there is no ice left to look at, and no pond to test, and nothing at all but my memory of who was holding a glass. Mr. Barlow, if I walk in there with that, I do not clear my name. I finish it. Because after that I am not only the woman who did it, I am the woman who tried to hang it on the man who carried the county on his books. Barlow was quiet a long time. Then what do you want? He said. And this is the thing she said, and she was ashamed of it the moment it was out of her mouth. And it was the truest thing she said that whole spring. I want it to happen again, she said, to somebody who is not me. The fire ticked. That is a wicked thing to want, she said. I know exactly what I have said. But there is not one soul in that town who will hear a word out of me, and there is not one thing on this earth that will make them hear it, except the same thing happening in front of their faces, with my wagon 40 miles away, and my hands nowhere near it. She was going to get what she asked for. On the 6th of August, 1886, Redgate finished its new well. Doc Tull did what he said he would do. He told Ab Sanborn on the 21st of May that his outfit was drinking out of a dirt tank with 300 head standing in it. And he told him it came from him, and Ab Sanborn, who was a hard man but not a fool, moved his wagon 3 miles the next morning and put 2 men on hauling out of the Vermejo above the crossing. His last man went down on the 24th. After that, nobody else on the Sanborn wagon took sick for the rest of the works, and all 6 of them came back up, though 2 of them were no good on a horse until July. Now, listen to how a county thinks. Not one person in Colfax County said, in May of 1886, the words "it is the water." What they said was that Ab Sanborn had had a run of bad luck, and that the Bell Cross was lucky. And a few of them said that Bell Cross grub was better, and Alvin Yancey, who had drawn his time on the 3rd of May and gone to the Chaffin wagon, said that it was a wonder anybody on the Bell Cross was alive at all, which got a laugh in a saloon at Springer and was repeated for a month. The connection was lying on the ground in front of the whole county with a rope on it. Nobody picked it up. Because to pick it up, you had to first put down something you were already holding, and what they were holding was 3 years old and comfortable and had a woman's name on it. The works ran out the way works do. They finished the Ponnell on the 26th of May and came down across the Vermejo and worked the flats, and it got hot, and the last 10 days were dust and short tempers and 3 fights. On the 2nd of June, a horse fell with Enos Tate and broke his collarbone, and Adeline strapped it with a flour sack and a saddle blanket and put him in the bed wagon, and he rode 40 miles in it and was fine. And in the last 3 weeks, they ate out of the barrels. That is worth stopping on, because it is the quiet proof, and nobody but a cook would even see it. From the 21st of May to the 11th of June, 34 men ate corned beef out of oak barrels that had been packed in brine on the 30th of April and the 9th and 17th of May, and they ate it in June, in that country, out of a wagon, and Adeline Rook opened 9 barrels over 3 weeks, and every single one of them came up sweet. She had Fee Dunlow open the last one on the 8th of June, and she stood back and made him put his own nose in it. "Well," she said, "it is good. It is good because you made the brine on the 17th of May, and I did not touch it," she said. "That is yours. You did that." Fee Dunlow was 20 years old, and I would like you to know that he ran a wagon of his own by 1893 and never lost a barrel in his life. They came into the Bell Cross home place at 4 in the afternoon on the 11th of June, 1886, 61 days. 34 men. 183 meals off that wagon, near enough, and she had cooked every one of them, and in 61 days on the Ponnell and the Vermejo, with a fever going through the outfit 4 miles east of her, not one man who ate at Adeline Rook's fire missed a day's work sick. Not one. Barlow paid off at dusk in the yard by lamplight with the books on a barrel head. That is how it is done. The men line up and come by one at a time, and the owner reads out the name and the days and the money, and it is the closest thing to a ceremony that trade has got. Adeline Rook stood in that line. She stood in it between Otis Kell and a Ute Creek man she barely knew, in her apron, with her hands in front of her, and the line moved and she moved with it, and she heard Teague say something at the head of it that she did not catch, and when she got to the barrelhead, Cass Barlow read out of the book in the same voice he had used for the last 33 men. Adeline Rook, cook the 12th of April to the 11th of June. 2 months at $75. $150. And he counted it into her hand. There was a little pause, and then Marion Pike, who was 61 years old and sour and had ridden for 6 outfits, started clapping, and it went through that yard like a match in dry grass. 34 men and 2 wives and a horse wrangler, and it went on a good deal longer than she could stand. She did not cry that night either. She was very close. "Speech," somebody yelled. "No," Adeline said. "Cook." I said no. She put the money in her apron pocket. "But I will tell you one thing, and then I am going home to sleep for 14 hours in a bed. Every one of you is going to be in Redgate inside a week with money in your pocket. When you are, and it comes up, and it will come up, I would take it kindly if you did not defend me." That got a noise out of them. "I mean it," she said. "Do not defend me. Defending me is what makes it a fight, and I have had 3 years of it, and it does not work. If it comes up, you tell them one thing only, and it is a thing every man here can swear to. 34 men, 61 days, nobody sick. Then let it alone and buy your tobacco." That is exactly what happened, and it was the smartest thing she ever did, and she thought it up standing in a pay line. 34 men said the same sentence in that town in the space of 8 days. They said it in the store and at the corral and at the livery and 3 times in the Redgate saloon, and they did not argue about 1883 with anybody, and every time somebody tried to start the argument, the man just said it again. 34 men, 61 days, nobody sick. You cannot fight a sentence like that. There is nothing in it to fight. It is not a claim about 1883. It sits there. She rode into Redgate on the 12th of June with $150 in a knotted handkerchief. She had thought about which door, and she went in the front one at 11 in the morning when there were 5 people in the Doss Mercantile, because she had decided somewhere on the Springer Road that she was finished with back doors for good. Hollis Doss was behind the counter. He was 55 years old, a narrow man with a gray mustache and sleeve garters and a way of looking at the scale instead of the customer, and he had never in his life said an unkind word to Adeline Rook, and had never once said a kind one either. She put the handkerchief on the counter and untied it. $150, she said. On the note. Doss looked at the money. He did not touch it. "You have been on the Bell Cross wagon." "I have. 61 days. "Yes, sir." He put both hands flat on the counter, and Adeline saw that they were not steady, and she had known that man for 11 years, and had never seen his hands do that. "Mrs. Rook," he said, "I want to strike the note." "I beg your pardon?" "The whole of it. The $300 and the interest. I will bring the paper out and mark it settled and put it in your hand, and you can burn it in the street. And there is no more to be said about it by me or by anybody in my family. Ever." The store had gone quiet. Ruby Sari was at the dry goods. 2 women by the door had stopped talking. "Why?" said Adeline. "Because I would like to." "That is not an answer, and you have never in your life given me a short answer, so give me the long one." Hollis Doss looked at the counter for a while. "Dr. Tull came to see me on the 22nd of May, he said, very low. He asked me one question. He asked me where the ice came from, in 1883. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him the truth." I told him it'd come off the pond, because the river was thin that year. He swallowed. And then he thanked me and put his hat on and went out, and he never said another word, and I have sat up 3 weeks with it. Mr. Doss, I am not saying anything, he said quickly. Do you understand me? I am not saying a thing about that, because I do not know a thing about it, and no man does, and it cannot be known. I am saying I want the note struck. That is all I am saying. And here is where Adeline Rook did the hardest thing she did in the whole of 1886, and it cost her $150 and 5 months of her life, and she did it in about 4 seconds without visible effort, standing in a store in her second-best dress. No, she said. Mrs. Rook, no, sir. She pushed the money 2 inches further across the counter, $150 against the note. Give me a receipt, please, and enter it in the book while I am standing here. You are not thinking. I have thought about nothing else since the 12th of June at 6 in the morning, which is when I began to suspect you would try this. She kept her voice down. She kept it perfectly level. If you strike that note off, then by Sunday the story in this town is that Hollis Doss forgave the Rook woman her debt, and every soul in this county will have an opinion about why, and 4 of those opinions will be filthy, and by Christmas the kindest thing anybody says about me is that I was let off. I have been a great many things in Redgate for 3 years, Mr. Doss. I have not yet been a woman who was let off, and I am not going to start at 29. It is $300, he said. It is $300, and I am going to pay you every dollar of it out of a wagon, and you are going to write me a receipt each time, in your own hand, in front of whoever happens to be in this store. Adeline said, That is what I want from you. That is the whole of what I want from you, and it is not going to change. Hollis Doss got the book. He wrote the receipt. His hand shook on the date, and he had to write the 12th twice. She took it, and folded it, and put it in her dress, and said good morning, and walked out past Ruby Sayre and the 2 women at the door, and got on her wagon and drove 7 miles home, and got down, and went into the dugout and stirred the crock and put the lid back and sat on the floor of her own kitchen for about a quarter of an hour without doing anything at all. $150 owing. Due the 1st of December. Then came the summer, and nothing happened for 8 weeks, and I have to make you sit in those 8 weeks the way she sat in them. She cut her 40 acres of hay alone in July with a borrowed mower and put up 22 tons and sold 14 of it at $6 a ton, which is $84, and she did not put $1 of it on the note because she was going to pay the note out of the fall works, and she had said so. She baked. Nobody came. The Belcross men had said their sentence in that town 34 times, and the sentence had done something. But what it had done was quiet and slow and mostly invisible in July. Ruby Sayre started coming out on Thursdays and bought bread at 10 cents a loaf and stayed 2 hours, which was not about the bread. Doc Toole came out once in July and drank coffee in her yard and asked her, in a careful, roundabout way, what she would do about a camp on a creek with 40 men in it, and wrote it down. Cass Barlow did not come at all. He sent word twice through Fee Dunlow about the fall works, and both times it was business, and he did not come, and she found that she noticed, and that annoyed her considerably. Then on the 30th of July, Fee brought a message that was not business. It said, I am staying off your place on purpose, and I expect you know why. And if you do not, I will come and tell you. And if you do, then it holds until the fall works are paid off. C. Barlow. She read it 3 times and put it in the tin under the floor with her money and did not answer it, and she caught herself smiling at a bread pan on the 31st of July, like a woman of 16. On the 6th of August, 1886, Redgate finished its new well. Reuben Sari had sunk it 84 feet on the north side of the plaza, 60 feet from the old one, and they had put a good stone curb on it, and a windlass, and a new galvanized bucket, and the town turned out at 5 in the afternoon. Reverend Chesney said a few words. The subscription had come to $268 in the end, and Hollis Doss had made up the difference to $300 out of the store. And it was written on a board. Lavinia Doss drew the first bucket. They stood around the plaza in the heat with tin cups and drank it, and said it was sweet. And it was sweet. It was very good water, cold and clean tasting, out of a new hole 84 feet deep, with a new bucket on a new rope, and the town of Redgate, New Mexico Territory, was pleased with itself for the first time in a long while. Nobody looked at the ground they were standing on. I will tell you what was under it, because Reuben Sari could have told them in 1886 and did not think of it, and Otis Kell could have told them and was not asked, and it was not a secret. It was simply the past. The Redgate Plaza had been the freight corral until 1879. The stage and freight line had kept its stock there for 9 years, 40 and 50 head at a time, in pens on the north side, and the whole of that ground had drained east into a slough that they filled in the year they laid out the plaza. When the town squared the plaza off and hauled in dirt and set the hitch rails, they filled that slough and forgot it, and it is still there, 6 feet down. Running east under the north side of the square, and on the 6th of August, 1886, there was a new 84-foot well standing in the middle of it, with a new bucket on it, and the whole town drinking. The first house went down on the 17th of August, the second and third on the 19th. By the 23rd, it was 6 houses. By the 26th of August, it was 11 houses on the north and east sides of the plaza, and Doc Tull had been up for 3 nights, and the school did not open on the 1st of September, and there were 2 families out at the Ordway place, because they had somewhere to go. The 3 families on the south end, who still hauled from Antelope Spring, 4 miles out, because the plaza water had always tasted of iron, and they had never got out of the habit, did not have a sick hour among them. On the night of the 26th of August, at about 9 o'clock, a light wagon came up the Springer Road and turned into the yard at 7 Mile, and Adeline Rook came out on her step with a lamp. There was a woman on the seat in a black wool dress, with a jet pin at her throat. Alone, driving, Lavinia Doss did not get down. "Mrs. Rook," she said. "Mrs. Doss," and then the woman who had put the name on her in a schoolhouse in October of 1883, in front of 60 people, for a laugh, sat on a wagon seat in the dark 7 miles from town, with the lines in her hands, and could not say the next thing for a full 30 seconds. "I have 11 houses," she said at last. "And I have 3 kitchens still working, and I do not know what to do with any of them. And Dr. Tull says the thing that matters most is the water and the washing and the food, and that it wants somebody who can run it. And there is not one woman in this town who has ever fed more than her own table." "No," Adeline agreed. "I am asking you to come and do it." The lamp made a small circle in a very large dark. "Say the rest of it," Adeline said. "There is no rest of it." "There is, and you are going to say it standing in my yard, because I am not going to spend the next 20 years wondering whether you meant to." Adeline Rook came down off the step. "You are asking the woman who made 41 people sick to come and cook for 11 sick houses. Say that out loud to me." Lavinia Doss's face came apart. It took about a second and a half, and then it was over, and she had it back. "Yes," she said. "Yes, what?" "Yes, that is what I am asking, and I know what it is, and I have known what it is since the 6th of April, on that boardwalk, when a man asked me whether I drink lemonade in the afternoon, and I have not slept properly since." Her voice went. She got it back. "Mrs. Rook, I will get down in this dirt if that is what it takes. I have a woman in my house that is 19 years old and 4 days into it, and I cannot get water into her that stays down." Adeline Rook stood there in her own yard for about 5 seconds. Then she turned around and shouted into the dark toward the corral for a horse to be caught, which was foolish because there was nobody out there but her. "Go home," she said. "Boil everything in the house tonight, all of it, and let it cool covered, and do not give anybody one drop that has not been boiled, and that includes the water you wash a face with. I will be in Redgate by 6 in the morning with my kegs and my ovens, and I will want 4 men, and a wagon and every washtub in this town." She was on the plaza at 6 in the morning on the 27th of August, 1886, with a wagon, 4 oak kegs, 6 Dutch ovens, 2 wash boilers, her knife roll and a stone jar the size of a coffee tin. The first thing she did was shut the well. She had Fee Dunlow and Otis Kell, who had ridden in at 4 in the morning, because Barlow sent them the minute he heard, nailed 2 planks across the top of that new stone curb. And she stood on the curb in the early light in front of about 30 people and said it plain. "Nobody draws out of this well," she said. "Not for drinking, not for coffee, not for washing a face, not for a horse. If somebody tells you they always have, and it never hurt them, they are telling the truth, and it does not matter. Water for this town comes off Antelope Spring, 4 miles out, in these kegs, and everything that goes into a person gets boiled 10 minutes first, and I do not care if it is August and it is hot and boiled water tastes flat. Put a pinch of salt in it and drink it flat." Somebody at the back said, "On whose say-so?" "On mine," said Doc Toole, from the boardwalk. "And on mine," said Adeline Rook. There was no argument. Not one word of it. That is a thing worth sitting with for a second. On the 3rd of April, that town would not let her carry a pie the length of a table, and on the 27th of August, it let her nail a well shut, and the difference was not that Redgate had grown a conscience. The difference was 34 men saying the same sentence 34 times in June. Then she went to work, and for 19 days she did the biggest piece of work of her life. She took the Sayre kitchen, the church kitchen and her own wagon, and ran all 3 as one. Broth, boiled, and boiled again, in 2 boilers going day and night. Rice, thin gruel. Weak tea made with water that had boiled. Bread, because the well ones have to eat too, and there were 30-odd people in that town on their feet doing the nursing, and they were failing for want of a hot meal. She did 40 loaves every other day out of a jar of start she had carried in from 7 Mile in her coat. She had 4 men hauling water in shifts from the spring, 6 barrels a day. She put a board up on the front of the mercantile with 5 rules chalked on it in a big round hand, and Ruby Sayre chalked them again every morning when the dew took them off, and they were these: boil it, cover it, keep the drinking bucket for drinking, wash your hands before you carry a cup to a bed, burn the rags. 11 houses. 34 people down at the worst of it on the 1st of September. The school did not open. Reverend Chesney's wife went out of her head for 2 days and came back. The 19-year-old woman in Lavinia Doss's house, who was 4 days into it on the night that wagon came out to 7 Mile, sat up on the 6th of September and asked for an egg. There were 3 in that town who did not come back up, and I am not going to make a scene out of them, because Adeline Rook never did. She sat up with 2 of them herself. She wrote to a sister in Kansas for a family that could not write, and she was at all 3 burials, standing at the back with her hands folded, in the blue dress, and nobody in Redgate ever forgot that she was there. And in 19 days, in a town of 300, with a fever in 11 houses, not one single new house went down after the 30th of August. That is the whole argument. That is 3 years of her life in one line. The moment the water changed, it stopped. Cass Barlow came in on the 1st of September and stayed 12 days, and he did not once come near her fire, and what he did instead was this. He went and got Reuben Sayre's well log, which was 4 pages in a pocketbook, and he read it with Otis Kell sitting across the table from him. Then Otis Kell said the thing that finished it, and he said it about himself. "I hauled for the stage line out of this plaza in 1877, he said. "That was the freight corral, right where you were standing. 40 head of stock in pens on the north side, 9 years running. And when they laid the square out in 1879, they filled the slough at the east end and put the hitch rail over it. And I know they did because I hauled 3 loads of the fill." Barlow put his finger on the well log. At 9 feet, Reuben Sayre had written, "Black fill, foul, boards." He had written it in his own book in July and thought nothing whatever about it, because a man sinking a well through 84 feet of ground writes down what he goes through and thinks about what is at the bottom, not what is at the top. They sank a test hole 30 feet east of the well on the 8th of September. At 8 feet it came in on the same black fill, and it stank, and 20 men smelled it, and Reuben Sayre sat down on a nail keg and put his hat over his face and said out loud, in front of everybody, "Oh my God, I put it in the corral." The meeting was on the 15th of September, 1886, in the Redgate schoolhouse. And there were 140 people in a room built for 60. It was called as a well committee meeting. Lavinia Doss was the chair of the well committee, and she opened it, and then she stepped down off the platform and sat in the front row, which she had never done in 9 years. Doc Tull spoke first. He had the test hole and the well log, and he was plain about it. And he took his share. He said he had ridden past that plaza 4,000 times and never once asked what the ground had been. Reuben Sayre spoke, and it cost him. He is the man who put the well there. Then Doc Tull said, "Mr. Kell, will you tell them what you told us about the corral?" And Otis Kell stood up with his hat in both hands and told 140 people about the freight pens and the slough and the 3 loads of fill. And then Doc Tull said, "And now the other thing, if you will." Otis Kell went white around the mouth. On the 12th of February, 1883, he said, "Mr. Doss sent me and Enos Tate down to the stock pond below the corral at his home place, and we cut 14 blocks of ice out of it, because the river was only making 3 inches that winter. We packed it in the ice house in straw. On the 24th of February it came out and went in the lemonade, and in the tub under the butter, and in the pan the cream stood in. The room made a sound, not a loud one. And that pond, Kell said, takes the drain off the corral and the privy lot and the pig pen, and has done for 9 years, and I did not think about it then, and I have not been able to think about anything else since the 17th of May. And if there is fault in it, it is mine, because I am the man that carried it up the bank." "It is not yours," Adeline Rook said from the back. That is how she came into it. She had not meant to speak at all. Doc Tull turned around. "Mrs. Rook, come up here, please." She came up the aisle in the blue dress, with her hands empty, except for a folded square of flour sacking. And she stood on the platform in front of 140 people in the schoolhouse, where a woman had handed her a full platter of beef in October of 1883, and she unfolded the sack on the reading desk and put her hand flat on it. 80 people sat down at the Doss place on the 24th of February, 1883, she said. I cooked it. 41 of them took a fever in 3 weeks, and one of them was my husband. 39 did not. I have written out the 39 and what was in their hand, and I would ask you to check me, because I am working off memory, and memory is a poor witness, and I know it. And she read them out. Name after name, flat, the way you read a tally. The 4 men at the corral who had coffee out of a jug at 5 o'clock. Marion Pike, who never took anything sweet in his life. Reverend Chesney, coffee, old Mrs. Ordway, who drank out of her own flask. The 3 Sanborn women, who came 2 hours late off a broken axle and ate standing up in the kitchen. Cassius Barlow, who came in off night guard at 3 in the afternoon and stood at the back by the stove. And then she stopped because Lavinia Doss had stood up in the front row. The whole room turned. "I did not take the lemonade," Lavinia Doss said. Her voice was not the one that carries. It was a small, ordinary voice, and it shook. "I do not take anything sweet in the afternoon. I never have. I gave that wedding. I stood in that yard from 11 in the morning until dark. I ate the beef and the bread and the dressing and 2 pieces of my own cake, and I was never sick a day." She was looking at the floor. "And I have said things about that woman in this room, in this exact room, and I said them for a laugh, and I would like the minutes to show that I said them, so that nobody thinks I have quietly stopped." She sat down. Then Hollis Doss stood up in the same row. "I cut the ice," he said. "Kell held the saw, and Tate held the team, and it was my order and my pond and my family's wedding. And the river was thin, and I wanted 8 inches, and any man in this room would have done the same, and that does not signify. It was mine." He was looking straight at Adeline Rook, and he did not stop looking at her. "Mrs. Rook, I have carried your husband's note on my books for 4 years. I have renewed it 3 times, and I have thought myself a decent man for it every single time I signed it. And I want to say in front of this town that that is the poorest piece of accounting I ever did in my life." Nobody said anything for a while. Then Ab Sanborn said, "From the middle of the room, my wagon went down in May, and hers did not. And I have known why since the 21st of May, and I have not said it out loud because I did not care to look a fool. 6 of my men. That is on me." And Marcus Teague, who had stood on a boardwalk on the 6th of April and said there was not a wagon in the territory that runs a woman, stood up at the back by the door and said, 34 men. 61 days. Nobody sick, and sat down. That is all he said. He is not a subtle man. They wanted to take up a subscription for her. It was Reverend Chesney's idea, and it was kindly meant, and half that room reached for a pocket, and Adeline Rook stood on the platform with a flour sack under her hand, and said no. And the room did not like it, and she said no again. "I have been given a great deal in this town," she said. "I have been given the wash bench. I would rather not be given anything else. If Redgate owes me for the last 19 days, then Redgate can pay me for the last 19 days, at what it pays a man to work, $3 a day, which comes to $57, and I will take it at the store on Saturday like anybody else, and there will be a line drawn under it." They paid her $57 on the Saturday. Hollis Doss counted it out, and Ruby Sayre wrote the receipt. And on the front of the Mercantile, where a board had been chalked and rechalked for 19 days, the town of Redgate had a tinsmith cut 5 lines into a sheet of iron and screwed it to the wall, and I am told it was still on that wall in 1931. She went back out with the wagon on the 20th of September for the fall works. 61 days, the 20th of September to the 19th of November. 4 outfits. 31 men this time, because the fall crew runs lighter. $75 the month. $150. There is not much to tell about the fall works, and that is the point of them. They were quiet. She had a wagon that ran like a clock, 2 men who could make brine without her, a wagon boss who backed her before she had to ask, and 31 men who fought over who got to cut her wood. On the 4th of November it snowed 9 inches, and she got 3 hot meals out of a hole in the ground, and 200 pounds of dry cedar she had made Kell stack under the wagon 2 days before. Cass Barlow came to the wagon 19 times in 61 days. He never once came inside the rope without being asked, and he was asked every time, and by the end of October he was drinking his coffee, sitting on a box she kept turned up for him. And Fee Dunlow had stopped pretending not to notice, and Marion Pike had said one sour sentence about it in October that got Fee Dunlow's hat knocked off. She paid the note on the 1st of December, 1886, at 10 in the morning in the front of the store, with 9 people in it. $150 in her hand, and $150 already down in June, and the receipt from the 12th of June folded in her dress. And Hollis Doss brought the paper out of the safe and laid it on the counter, and she counted the money out onto it in $20 gold pieces and 3 fives. $300, she said. $300, he said. He wrote across the face of it and signed it and turned it around so she could see it. Paid in full, the 1st of December, 1886, and Cass Barlow stood at the far end of that counter by the harness, with his hands in his coat pockets, and I want to tell you exactly what was in the right-hand one, because it had been there since 9 that morning. $150 in gold. He had ridden 22 miles with it, and he had asked her, on the 29th of November, standing in her own yard, whether he might just walk in and put it down, and she had said, "You may not." And he had said, "I know it," and had brought it anyway and kept it in his pocket for 40 minutes. Because a man wants to have it there. She never asked him about it, and he never told her. And he told Fee Dunlow about it in 1902, and that is how anybody knows. The Colfax County stock growers held their winter dinner in the Redgate Hall on the 4th of December, 1886, 200 plates. Cattlemen in from as far as Trinidad and Las Vegas, the county officers, the whole of the town. They engaged Adeline Rook to cook it, and they paid her $40, and she asked for 2 helpers and got 6. Because 6 women in that town had asked to work under her by then, and 2 of them had learned to keep a start. She did a standing rib and 2 hams and 14 pies. She did it out of the same wagon. And at about 9 o'clock, when the plates were going back and the room was loud, and she was at the end of the hall with her sleeves rolled and her hair coming down the way it always did by 9 o'clock, Cass Barlow got up at the head table and stood there until the room quieted, which took a while. "I am not going to make a speech," he said. "You are already making one," somebody said, and got a laugh. "Then I will make a short one." He picked up a plate off the head table, an empty one, a clean one, off the stack. "On the 3rd of April of this year I stood under that awning across the plaza and watched a woman carry 9 pies out of a lit square, 2 at a time, 5 trips, past 200 people, because this town would not eat them." The hall went absolutely quiet. "There are 200 people in this room tonight," Barlow said, "and every one of you has eaten off her hand in the last 2 hours, and I have counted. And there is not one plate coming back with anything left on it." He set the empty plate down at the head of the table. Then he took hold of the chair beside it and pulled it out and stood with his hand on the back of it. "Mrs. Rook," he said, "I have known you 8 months, and I have never once seen you sit down at a table you cooked for. Not on the wagon, not in this town. I would take it as a kindness if you would come up here and sit down." Adeline Rook stood at the far end of the Redgate Hall with a dish towel in her hands. She had fed that county for 12 years. She had fed the section gang and the 4th of July at Cimarron, and 80 people at a wedding, and 34 men for 61 days, and 11 houses for 19 days, and 200 stockmen that night, and she had never in her life sat down at the end of one of them, and it had never once occurred to her to want to. She put the towel on the table. She came up the length of that hall between the tables, past Marcus Teague and Otis Kell and Marion Pike and Fee Dunlow, past Doc Toole, past Ruby Sayre, past Reverend Chesney, past Lavinia Doss, past every single person who had laughed on a plaza on the 3rd of April, and she did not hurry, and she did not look at anybody, exactly the way she had walked at the other direction with 2 pies in her hands. She sat down in the chair. Cass Barlow pushed it in for her, and then he did not go back to his own place. He stood beside it. "There is one more thing," he said, "and I am going to say it here, because everything that was ever said about this woman in this county was said in a room, and I am not going to do the other thing in a doorway. Mr. Barlow, Adeline said. Yes, ma'am. You had better be quick, because if you take much longer, I am going to lose my nerve and go back to the pans. Then I will be quick, Cass Barlow said. I am asking you to marry me, not for a home, and not to take that note up, because you have paid it, and I stood at that counter on Tuesday and watched you do it with my hands in my pockets like a fool. I am asking because I have eaten at a great many tables, and I have never once wanted to sit at any of them until I sat at yours. 200 people did not make a sound. And Adeline Rook, 29 years old, widow of Tom Rook of 7 Mile on the Springer Road, who in that same county and in front of some of those same faces had been handed a full platter and given a name for a laugh, looked up at him from a chair at the head of a table she had cooked, and said, "Sit down, Mr. Barlow. You are blocking the aisle, and there is pie coming." That got the roof off. She married him on the 11th of April, 1887, at 7 Mile, in the yard, and she cooked it herself, which she was told was outrageous, and did anyway. And there were 90 people, and Lavinia Doss brought 2 hams and stood at the wash bench for 2 hours and would not be moved off it. They moved the well in the spring of 1887. Reuben Sayre sank the new one on the south side of the plaza, 300 feet off the old freight ground, at his own charge, and would not take $1 for it. And it was still the town water in 1931, when a woman from the county paper came out to 7 Mile to talk to Mrs. Barlow, who was 74, about the early days. She was asked about the wedding of 1883, and she said what she always said, which was that nobody had done anything wicked, and that it was ice, and that ice is only water that has been made to look like something else. She was asked what she was proudest of. The paper says she thought about it for a while and then said, 34 men, 61 days, nobody sick. The crock that came out of Kansas in 1872 was fed every 2 days on that place until 1931 at least, and Fee Dunlow had a jar off it, and Ruby Sayre had a jar off it, and there are people in that country who will tell you their start goes back to it. And maybe it does. Here is the thesis of the whole thing, and it is not complicated. For 3 years, a town looked at a woman and decided that what it saw was all there was, because deciding is cheaper than asking. It cost her a name, a living, and 3 years, and it cost the town 41 people in 1883 and 11 houses in 1886, and every bit of that could have been undone by one man in one afternoon asking one question: what did the 39 have in common? Nobody asked, because she was easier to look at than the ground under their own feet. One woman the county would not eat from. One man who pulled out a chair. And she never once in 74 years apologized for a thing she did not do.